everyone, and thank you so much for coming. This is a great day for us because last year we had our brochure launch in the park because of COVID, but we're so happy that we could be inside today and you could come to the Barron Arts Center to spend this morning with us to talk about our latest brochure. We're very proud of the brochure that we've produced. It is on World War I and Woodbridge Township. We had done these banners, I'm going to say 4 years ago at least, but we thought perhaps it would be nice to put all of it into a brochure that would be permanent and people could take it with them and have it with them as they wanted to share with others. I would really like to sincerely thank Frank, who spearheaded our brochure this year, and Wendy, who worked with him on the research. Without Wendy and the research, I don't know what we would do. So thank you both very, very much. We have a number of our commissioners here. We have 12 commissioners. Not all are here today, but I'd like to introduce them. Dan D'Arcy, Brenda Velasco, Bruce Christensen, Marty Genser, Courtney Lowry, Kathy Keating, Wendy Rottweiler, Frank Pelsman, and I'm Dolores Joffrey. Our mayor did come for a few minutes, but had to leave because he had other commitments, so we thank the mayor for coming today, and hopefully he took lots of pictures and he'll put pictures on Facebook for everyone to see. Our purpose today, as I said, is to launch our brochure. The brochure hasn't been seen by anyone yet, except the commissioners. So after today, the brochures will be publicly available in the libraries, throughout town, in the senior centers, in the community center, and as they disappear, they'll be replenished. So please take the time to look at this brochure because it is just a great job and something that's great for the history of Woodbridge Township. I'm going to let Frank say a few words, and then Wendy's going to.
Thank you, Dolores, and thank you to those who are joining us this morning for the launch of this brochure titled Woodbridge in World War I. Back in 2018, when we celebrated the 100th anniversary of the formal surrender that ended World War I, the Woodbridge Township Historical Preservation Commission took on the project to create all the banners that you see here displayed. Due to the positive reaction and feedback we received from these banners, the Commission decided to expand on the banner information and produce our Volume 13 brochure over here, Woodbridge in World War I, which we're distributing today. As you'll read through the brochure, you'll see that you didn't have to carry a gun and see action in battlefield overseas to be part of this war. Just being a Woodbridge resident at that time, whether you bought Liberty War bonds, were one of the many women who knitted socks for the soldiers through the efforts of the American Red Cross, or Dr. Fred Albee, who was a prominent physician in our township and saved countless lives treating severely injured soldiers in a hospital that he established, all were instrumental to the war effort. Of course, the brave men who did take arms and eventually become part of the American Expeditionary Forces helped turn the tide of the war and contributed significantly to the eventual Allied victories. An entire page in this brochure does recognize the Woodbridge Township residents who fought in World War I, as well as another separate page, a memorial page, that is dedicated to the Woodbridge residents who made the ultimate sacrifice and did lose their lives fighting in World War I. Researching an event that's over 100 years old is a pretty tough endeavor, so compiling all this information without missing any events or facts or names was a pretty daunting and challenging task. Consequently, if there are any errors or if there's any omissions of events or names, it was not done intentionally, nor does it suggest that any information that the commission was unable to find doesn't mean that it wasn't relevant to this theme. When reading through this brochure, we hope that will pique your interest in Woodbridge's involvement in World War I, and we encourage you to explore other relevant sources on this topic. For example, the one section in this brochure that talks about and chronicles Dr. Fred Albert and the Army hospital that he established right here in this township has a marker that was erected several years ago by this very commission, and it's located on South Park Drive in Colonia. I believe it's in the Colonia section of Woodbridge, around the area where the hospital once stood. We invite you to visit that marker. In that hospital, there was newspapers titled over there that was published that further documents Woodbridge's involvement in World War I. Our Woodbridge Township Library website has these newspapers online, and you could read these publications in their entirety. But just you being here today speaks for the interest that you have on this very historic event. And once again, on behalf of the Woodbridge Township Historical Preservation Commission, we thank you for taking your time to be with us for the launch of our brochure over here, Woodbridge and World War I. Thank you. This is Wendy Rottweiler, our key researcher for this.
You know, Frank touched on all the important parts. I just wanted to reinforce that while we're talking about this as being a historic event, in many ways, this is also a current event for us as well. When we think about the World War I period and the epidemic that was at the time known as the Spanish flu, you know, we can only reflect upon our current experiences with the coronavirus over the past 2 years and the lessons that the world learned from the pandemic in the early 20th century, which informed a lot of the choices that were made internationally in regard to ours. The events in Europe that, that were fought and died for still resonate today in the fight for liberty in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine and Russia. On the home front, as Frank said, this was a global time that involved everyone in the township, from children collecting scrap metal to sell to make into tanks for the war effort, from women knitting or selling war bonds or planting victory gardens, for people who were involved in working in the hospital. We also had a home defense league, which was formed to protect our shores, to protect our town if an invasion should hit our shores here on the East Coast. And later our Home Defense League became part of the New Jersey militia, which after World War I had its own version of VFW in town. And we have the ledger and roster and notes from that organization at Woodbridge Public Library. And as Frank mentioned, over here was the newsletter for the Army Hospital in Colonia, U.S. Army Hospital number 3. And the full text of all those newspapers are available on the library's website, woodbridgelibrary.org, in our digital archives, as well as a lot of other treasures from Woodbridge history that you can access anytime you want and do a deep dive in. The other thing I want to mention is that while Woodbridge, we don't have currently access to any newspapers in our town from that period, our town's news was covered by the Perth Amboy Evening News at that time. And the war years are contained in a digitized version, which is available and accessible on the Library of Congress Chronicling America website. So if you want to really read and immerse yourself in what people were experiencing day to day and reading in their paper, you might want to check that out.
I
Yep.
found out something very interesting after the brochure was done and after we did all of these banners. My friend moved to a town called Nokomis, Florida. So I never heard of this town, and I thought, let me look it up and see what Nokomis is. So I look up the town of Nokomis, and would you believe who founded that town? Dr. Albee. I was stunned. I called her up and I said, you won't believe this. Dr. Albee founded that town. And she said, that's very interesting because there's a street or something that's named.
Well, if you go to Venice, Florida, which is predominantly.
Which is close to where the
He put 20
Nokomis is.
miles worth of property in Florida, but there is an Albee hospital.
Come in, please.
There's an Albee hospital, and if you look at the maps in Venice, you'll see there's a Colonial Road, Woodbridge Avenue.
Really?
Yes.
I don't know how many of you know much about the hospital, so take some time to read it, because as Frank said, so many lives were saved. He invented prostheses that are still being used today, right here in our township. It's just, for us, it was very exciting when we were doing this, because as we do these brochures, we discover so much that we don't even know, you know? It's just unbelievable.
The picture on the front porch when you came in this morning is actually of Mayor Augie Griner, before he was mayor, in his World War I uniform. And as many of you know, August Griner was mayor from 1934 to 1951. And through the end of the Depression and through Woodbridge's time during World War II. And obviously his experiences in World War I as a soldier helped inform how he led our township during those years. And as an aside, Mayor McCormick did remind me that he is about to beat Mayor Griner's record of 18 years of service as mayor to the township, soon to be surpassed by Mayor McCormick.
Any questions?
Yes.
Frank, did you mention in the brochure where you listed all the people who were involved in the Selective Service Act? And there were 3 Griners. And so many of these names are from the early families, like the
Sure.
Valentines.
And the Keatings.
You'll find a lot of street names.
Yeah, there's a lot of street names for the veterans for this war, absolutely.
Well, I mean, Dan, haven't you said in the past that the section of Islam with the Italian names,
Well,
with Pershing and
yeah,
everything,
yeah.
have come out of World War I?
Yeah, after World War I, the Island as we know it, downtown Island and off of Creedy Avenue, these homes were built around 1923 after the war, so you're going to have a lot of veterans and whatever moving in. And there's 4 streets that are prominent and related to World War I, and 2 of them are named after cities. One is Trento and one is Trieste, and these were the cities of World War I battles in northern Italy against Austria. And then there's 2 other streets, and one is called Wilson, and President Wilson at the time, and the other one is Persian, named after Jack Black Persian. So yeah, it's not much different than after World War II, when all the veterans moved into this area. Not much different.
Yeah.
And Frank, when we're going back to the people who enlisted, some of them were not American citizens, but this was the way they, as immigrants, could become American citizens. It's something that this country still does.
Yeah, and as you go through the brochure, you're going to also see some other recognizable names. As we talked about Dr. Fred Albee, the whole hospital was built on 200 acres in that area where the marker is right now. And that property was owned by Mr. Freeman, who literally donated the property to Dr. Albee for the purpose of creating this hospital. We were hospital number 3, but as a point of reference, hospital 1 and 2 didn't never got off the ground. So even though we were number 3, we were the only one, and what made that possible was the generosity of Mr. Freeman, who donated this 200 acres that was needed for the whole estate. Because in addition to the hospital, it also was a rehab center. There was a workshop, it was a school, they built a school there, so that many of these soldiers who came back, some of them handicapped to where they didn't have a limb, they needed to get back into society, and the workshops that were part of this estate and this hospital taught them a trade. One of the trades were newspaper publication, which is why we have the over here publication. So when you're driving down, I guess, Freeman Avenue, is that what it's called? Freeman Street, Freeman Avenue?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. That's Mr. Freeman, who was responsible for having this Army hospital that saved countless lives.
And we did put a marker in Colonia, where Dr. Albie's house
Yes.
was.
Blythemore.
Yes.
Might just want to point out the natural resources. We talked about the efforts of Woodbridge residents in so many different ways to support the war, but we had natural resources here in Woodbridge that helped. Our clay deposits, as is pointed out here, in 1909, there was the Federal Terracotta Works that was established. And goes on to say, upon the United States entry into the war in 1917, many manufacturing companies scaled down on the production of domestic goods to produce war-related materials. So it goes on to say that an order was placed for 500,000 practice bombs. These were terracotta or practice bombs that were filled with white powder that would explode on impact. So instead of using the normal bombs, which were more expensive, these were used for practice purposes. And these were a training device. So this was significant that we were using our natural resources that we had here in Woodbridge for that.
Yeah, of course, during the war, all industries had to pretty much stop producing what they normally were used to producing and had to design something that was related to the war efforts. And the terracotta factory, which was the largest one, I believe, in the country at the time, and it's because of our clay deposits, which a couple of years ago we had a brochure just dedicated to that. But yeah, and I can't recall the year, but I think it was probably within this 21st century, fairly recently, when excavating was done, they uncovered some of these dummy bombs that were never used, the clay bombs that were never used. So 100 years later, just through excavation, we discovered more items that really went back into the history and reminded us of the rich history that we have here in Woodbridge Township.
And speaking of armaments and practice bombs, well, you know, there was also fear of infiltrators and spies and saboteurs here on the East Coast, and so there was the Black Tom explosion in Jersey City, which was the work of saboteurs. But I believe. But here in the Woodbridge area, there was the Morgan Depot explosion in South Amboy, which was a huge, those were live armaments, live missiles and bombs that set off a chain, enormous chain explosion that blew out houses, windows shook, buildings shook as far as here as Woodbridge, and a lot of the people who were displaced during the, as a result of that explosion, actually were temporarily housed in the old Seawarren Hotel in Seawarren. So, you know, this was not an experience that was just on the far distant shores in Europe. Every aspect, including explosions, were experienced here at home. Frank mentioned the clay brochure. We have produced, this was our 13th brochure. We have 12 additional brochures on great historical topics of Woodbridge and different sections of town. We have copies available here. You can also purchase a binder for $10 that has all the brochures in it. We're working on our brochure for next year, which will be on the history of education in Woodbridge Township. And then we also want to make sure that we invite you all on April 24th to a historic tour of Woodbridge. We are going to be learning about the history of Woodbridge's first responders and visiting a number of towns. We're getting a lecture on the history of the police department, as well as visiting a couple of fire departments in town. It'll be a bus tour with several opportunities to get off the bus and walk. So again, it's April 24th. You can go to our website or pick up a flyer here to sign up. There's a nominal $5 charge, and we look forward to seeing you there. And you can keep up on all of the Commission's activities and our history. Our website is woodbridgehistory.com, and you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
Was there a hospital on Colonial Boulevard? Was that where World War I? I know there was Colonial Boulevard. There's supposed to be some hospital that was on there. You know that?
Yes. So there was that. We were just talking about it. U.S. Army Hospital number 3, and it was very progressive for its time. Honestly, when you read in over here and in Dr. Albee's autobiography of things that they were doing, we think about a lot of aspects of treating the whole person psychologically, mentally, socially as being some sort of modern innovation.
Why did I say Rawley?
But, well, that's because Rawley was sort of the closest, but it was here in Woodbridge. It was in Colonia.
On
Yeah.
Colonial Boulevard?
It was Colonia, Freeman Street, all that area. It wasn't quite as
It's a rural district.
Right.
Because I
Right.
think I mean, there's one house that I thought was the hospital.
The Law First House in Dover Road?
No, it was on Colonial
Oh,
Boulevard.
no, you're talking about the library.
No. Colonial Boulevard by the golf course.
Oh, no, yeah.
There was supposedly one house that, this is when I was growing up, they said that was a hospital at one time.
It may have been very well part of the hospital. This hospital complex was on over 200 acres and was really almost a small town to itself. It had its own fire department, its own power plant, its own water pumping facilities, as well as hospital rehabilitation. They ran ice cream socials. They had dances for the community so that soldiers who had lost a limb could relearn to dance with the girls. It was really an approach to address the whole mind and body and spirit of the returning soldiers and the damaged soldiers in a very progressive way. But and the astonishing thing was that there was this enormous complex that had, it had a print shop, it had ceramics wards, it had all sorts of vocational training, and the whole thing was only there for 19 months. They built this entire hospital, they treated all the soldiers, and then after 19 months, the Fed said, that's it. And the whole thing, there's still some ruins and rubbles, but mostly the whole thing was disassembled and returned to Dr. Freeman. Not Dr. Freeman, Mr. Freeman.
Yeah, that's right.
You might be thinking of the house on that Colonial Boulevard called Colonia Inn, is the white building?
I don't know, it's right before Longfellow Drive. There's that one family, there's a one bedroom back then, and then there was this house, and I always remember that someone had said that used to be the hospital.
Where the stone is out in front, where the Edgerton estate was? Where Tanglewood comes out?
So Tanglewood is there. Say if you're coming from Dover, you make a left onto Longfellow. So there's a house on there, and there's another house, like the third house in before turning on Longfellow. I don't know, that's what I heard when I was growing up, so I don't know what was going on. But I know there was some book, I think, that someone may have got it from. There was a book about Colonia back in the day from the library, I don't know, one of the libraries.
Yeah,
and I thought that was the kid that told me that was the hospital.
Yeah, there are actually 2 older books on Colonia history. One by Mary Pattison, who was instrumental in forming the library, and that's Colonia Yesterday. And then David Miller wrote another book on Colonia. I forget the exact whole title at the moment, terrible for a librarian. I think it was, it's also on Colonia. And those books, the Pattison book is available full text on the library's website in the digital archives. And we have both books at the main library as well.
We had a beautiful archive room at the Woodbridge Library, even though there were so many other things digitized in the archives. Wendy was instrumental in setting up an archive room at the Woodbridge Library, and there were some treasures over there as well. Not related to this, when they were tearing down the old town hall, those of you who remember how upset most people were when that happened, my husband was riding down Main Street, and by the old town hall, he saw this gigantic book in the garbage. So those who knew my husband knew that he would stop and pick this book up, because that's who he was. He brought it home, and it was about half of this, one of these posters. It was all of the maps of Woodbridge properties, all the streets, all the houses plopped on those streets back in whatever year that was. I don't remember now, Wendy. So one day I was mentioning it to Wendy, and she said, "Can I take a look at it?" So I said, "Sure." So she went, she looked at it, she took it, and it's, I think, over there.
It is in the
archive.
local history archives at the main library. It's a collection of Sanborn maps, and Sanborn was a fire insurance company. And so as part of insuring and assigning insurance premiums to people, they made very detailed maps of towns that included, especially if there were industries and you know, commercial buildings, what they were made of, whether they were brick or wood, and the layout of all the streets. And what they did long before computers is every time there was a change in the town, Sanborn would send an update to whoever owned the book, and they would cut out the updates and glue them in and glue over the index page. So the volume that Dolores is talking about was active in the township from the late 20s to the early 50s, because that's how it was updated. So there are a wealth of information, you know, of the town in that time, and you know, eternally grateful to Mr. Geoffrey for rescuing that.
But the brochures are all available. We brought them up, so if you don't have them, you really should take a copy of each one, because the history of this town, we do not believe people understand how rich this town is in history. We're so proud of this town from the 1600s. And we have to tell you that right now we're trying to get a virtual historic district together that will start at the Trinity Church, which is where Woodbridge was born, all the way down Rahway Avenue to where the once Parker Press building was. You can't really see it now because you know why, right? So anyway, try to take a copy, because many of the homes in there, especially on Green Street, are still there and still flourishing and are beautiful homes. And many of the areas down by the train wreck and that whole area where all of the immigrants first started when they came to this country and worked in the town. It's rich history, so help yourselves. And please stay for refreshments as well. Frank, did anything else?
That was a very appropriate closing comment. Again, thank you for everyone taking their time to be here. This was a wonderful. It was great to even like do the research and do the writing and learn about things. I'm a history buff, and I thought I knew everything about World War I, but there are things that I even found too, and that's why we do encourage you to go to the other sources that are out there to learn even more about what you find in this brochure. We have a limited space, so obviously we couldn't include everything in here, but what's not included in here is definitely out there on the internet, so that's what I encourage everyone to do. Thank you very much.